Hi, this is Doug Jefferson with my EDL 851 Module 13 case study. So, starting off, some things I know. This was about Mrs. Wilson noticing some changes from a colleague she's been with for at least 8 years, Mrs. Horton. The school and the superintendent were receiving calls and letters about Mrs. Horton and her attitude, about how she was verbally abusive, and would not agree to uh, some parent teacher conferences about students. And there were at least 4 calls made to the school board. And Mr. Stafford, the dad of Julie, who was in Mrs. Horton's class, wanted his daughter in a different class because he said she would scream and cry in the mornings and did not want to go back to that class. And Mrs. Horton had an outburst the following day after there was a meeting with Mr. Stafford and Mrs. Wilson. So that's what I know. Um, Problem identification and analysis. Mrs. Horton was a well-respected teacher. She won Teacher of the Year. And however, recently there's been a change in attitude. People have said that her husband had moved out and she's raising her 2 boys. She has become derogatory towards new ideas. Sounds like she used to be a team player, but now she's kind of going against everything and wants to keep things as status quo and not try new things. And Mr. Stafford wanted a meeting with her, and Mrs. Horton had an outburst at the meeting, which took everybody by surprise. What do I need to know? I need to know how things are at Mrs. Horton's home. Is she struggling financially? Is she struggling with the divorce? Is it just a separation? So, what is going on there? Um, and that leads us to the second one. There are other things going on. Is she seeing a counselor or a therapist at this time? If she's struggling with this transition, if she's struggling raising her 2 boys by herself, maybe someone can help her. And, if she's not seeing a counselor or therapist, would she like to? You can't force someone to do it, but if she's open to it, maybe that'd be a good idea and get some of this stuff out in the open, and just sharing her problems might help. So, identifying the problem. Basically, what it comes down to is Mrs. Horton's home life is affecting her work in a negative way. And not only is it affecting her work, it's affecting her coworkers, and it's also affecting her students. So, category 2, my proposed plan of action. First off, what I would do is we're only 6 weeks into the school year, so I'd put Mrs. Horton on an improvement plan. If she was open to counseling, I would make that available to her. If there was something where she was open to anger management, that would be another thing that would be available to her. Along with this, I would have weekly meetings. We'd set them for Friday at 3 o'clock, 3:30, whenever the school day ends. And it would be her, it would be the principal, probably the assistant principal, and someone from the superintendent, whether it be the sup himself or the assistant sup, if they have one. So do that until the end of the school year. And employability would be decided in May. Most schools have to let their teachers know by at least May, if not before that. So whatever the deadline is at that school, her renewal would be contingent on her ability to change, in order to get the phone calls to stop coming in, for the students to feel safe, basically just for a change in her attitude. Category 3, resolve the issues based on promoting success of all students. Resolution. The first thing that needs to happen is Mrs. Horton needs to personally apologize to Mr. Stafford. It cannot be sent in a text. It cannot be sent in an email. It either needs to be a phone call or it needs to be in person at their house. And I think since Mr. Stafford personally witnessed her outburst, and assuming that's what his daughter sees and that's what his daughters are scared of, I think it's best if Julie be moved to another class because no one's going to be happy, especially after Mr. Stafford witnessed the outburst. No one's going to be happy with Julie in that classroom. So I think it's just going to be best and easiest for everyone if Julie gets moved to that other classroom after Mr. Stafford witnessed that. Mrs. Horton needs to apologize to the staff and explain her side of this pilot program. Why does she not want to go along with it? Does she think it's a bad idea? Does she know something that maybe the other people don't? It's a pretty small staff. It's a staff of 18. So let's sit down and talk about it and understand why we don't want to go along with this or why we don't like this. But she needs to explain to the rest of the staff why she's not going along with it. Because I'm sure she's a leader in her building, or at least used to be. Category 4, debriefing the problem. Mrs. Horton has to address her anger. She can't continually blow up like she did in front of Mr. Stafford. Absolutely cannot do that in front of the class, especially if it's a grade school class. Kids are easily influenced, and they're going to go home and talk. And obviously the phone calls were coming in according to the article. And if kids feel threatened, they're not going to be learning. They're going to be worried about what you're thinking, what's going to happen next, what you're going to say, what you're going to do. And so Mrs. Horton needs to address her anger issue. Secondly, she has to be a team player, and this goes along with the pilot reading program. She was a former teacher of the year in that school district, and she's looked up to. It's a small staff, so even if she doesn't agree with it, it's already going to be implemented by Mrs. Wilson. So what doesn't she like? What concerns does she have? And these can be discussed privately, and then publicly when they get together she can say, okay, I think we can do this to get rid of this problem. And have to improve communication. The calls from the parents to the district office, the parents stopping by the school and coming in, all that has to stop. So in order to get that to stop, she has to communicate better with her students. She has to communicate better with her staff, better with the stakeholders, the parents, everybody. Just her overall communication has to improve. Category 5, reflecting on Standard 2. So we will get to that. The first component, as an educational leader, how did I promote the academic success of every student by enhancing instructional capacity? The first thing I said was that Mrs. Horton will communicate more often. I just talked about this in the last slide. You have to be able to communicate with everyone. Without communication, things break down. They don't work. From the students to the staff to the district office, she has to be in communication with everyone so she can get this problem resolved. Next, Julie will switch classrooms. Like I said, because of the outburst that was witnessed, I think it's best, because if not, Mr. Stafford, Mrs. Stafford, they have legitimate concerns about their daughter after seeing that outburst, and I think it'll just be easier to switch them. I don't see it as giving in, but his point was proven in that she's kind of flying off the handle and she's intimidating students, and that right there did it. So I think it's best to get his daughter Julie out of there. And Mrs. Horton must change or leave. Either she gets better and she improves and gets back to the way she was, or they're going to have to let her go because she's basically a loose cannon. So the second component, how did you as an educational leader promote the personal well-being of every student by enhancing instructional capacity? No more outbursts will be tolerated. You just can't do that, especially to grade school kids. You can't be threatening in any way to them. Because again, if children feel threatened, they're not going to learn. She has to be a leader in her school. She has to help her colleagues. It said everyone had been there for 8 years. Obviously, she's a leader there or was at some time. She's got to help promote things. She was teacher of the year. She knows what she's doing. So she has to get back on that track and get the respect back of her peers and get things going well. And I think that'll help with everything in the school. And she must be accountable for her actions. She cannot fly off the handle like she has been. She cannot intimidate people. She cannot say bad things about people. Okay, that stuff, there's no place for that in classrooms. And the final component, how to use the school leader enhance instructional capacity. Lots of these. First off, you have to make sure all staff is on the same page. Not everyone is going to like every program that's going to be implemented, but as long as you guys, as the staff, understands the benefits of it, and that how it's helping students, why it's helping students, which students it is helping, you just have to be on the same page. Again, not everyone's going to be all in on every program, but you have to have an understanding as to why you're doing this. So even if you don't completely agree with it, you understand why it's happening. Hey, we're going to do our best to get this done and put it in effectively. Decisions are based on student safety. Students cannot feel threatened anytime when they're in a school, anywhere at all, whether it's in the halls, whether it's in the classroom. Students need to feel safe. In order to get the most out of students, they need to feel safe. And I put stakeholders on this next one. For this specific example, I was talking about parents, but in reality, you have to talk about all stakeholders, whether it's members of the community, businesses, anyone. All stakeholders need to be heard. If they have concerns, if they have new ideas, different ways of doing things, ways of raising money. So use your stakeholders. Stakeholders are a great source of free information. It's not always the best information, but there are lots of ideas. It's an easy place to go to get ideas. Make sure that goals are set. Every school has to have goals, and you need to make sure that these goals are achievable and that goals are being reached. Even if they're small goals, just for certain grades or classrooms, whatever it might be. But everyone feels good when goals are accomplished. So set attainable goals and make sure students can reach them. And the next to last one there, the teacher buy-in. Teachers have to be all in, whether it's the goals that they're setting, whether it's new programs that are being implemented, whether it's communicating with stakeholders outside of the building. But teachers need to be in. Teachers are, they're the ones who are educated. They're the ones that have the training. They need to make sure that things get done like they need to be. And every school has to be willing to try new things. And if you're not going to try new things, you need to at least discuss. And that can come from just the teachers talking to one another about lesson plans, about grading techniques, whatever it might be. But you cannot get stagnant. Kids are changing too fast. Technology is changing too fast. So people need to move forward. Schools need to move forward. Educators need to move forward, because if we don't, we're going to get even further behind. And kids are always moving forward, especially in the technology role and the way they gain their information or access their information. So we need to keep moving forward and staying up or staying even with students. And that is all I have, and this was my case study for Module 13. Really enjoyed this class, learned a lot from it, and looking forward to my next class. Thanks a lot.